They had the biggest guns ever built, the fastest helicopters ever flown, and the most powerful war machine humanity had ever unleashed. Yet, in the jungles of Vietnam, the United States Army carried a weakness so fatal it would cost more than 58,000 lives. They were loud. They were predictable. And to the enemy, they were nothing more than walking targets. While American troops marched straight into ambushes they never saw coming, another force was moving through those same blood-soaked jungles. The enemy didn't just fear them. They believed they weren't human. Viet Cong fighters stopped engaging them altogether. They ran. They whispered stories about demons, about spirits, about men who walked through the jungle without sound and killed without warning. They called them the ghosts of the forest. Their kill counts were so high that Pentagon analysts initially dismissed the reports as impossible, but the numbers were real. Who were they? A tiny, elite Australian unit that understood something the Americans refused to accept until it was far too late. Today, we expose the brutal, silent tactics that humiliated the most powerful military on Earth and rewrote Special Forces warfare forever. Warning: what you're about to hear doesn't appear in history books. This is the dirty truth of what happened in the dark. This is the story of the Phantoms, the most powerful military machine in human history was being systematically embarrassed by an army wearing black pajamas. When the United States entered Vietnam, confidence was absolute. Their doctrine had crushed Nazi Germany. It had annihilated Imperial Japan, overwhelming firepower, mechanized dominance, artillery so powerful it reshaped landscapes into lunar wastelands. Surely, guerrillas hiding in rice paddies stood no chance. Assumption proved catastrophically wrong. American units moved through the jungle using formations designed for flat European terrain. Long columns, large patrols, rigid command structures. And worst of all, noise. Metal clanged with every step. Radios crackled constantly. Officers shouted commands that echoed through dense vegetation. Helicopters thundered overhead, broadcasting troop movements kilometers in every direction. To the Viet Cong, Americans were never hidden. They could be heard half a kilometer away. The enemy response was brutally simple: disappeared, or they waited. Perfectly. Ambush were prepared days in advance. Killing zones carefully chosen. Escape routes mapped before the first shot was fired. American patrols entered empty jungle and seconds later, chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from nowhere. Men dropped before they even saw the enemy. By the time air support arrived, the attackers were gone. No bodies, no tracks, just blood, confusion, and silence. Morale collapsed under the psychological pressure. Every tree felt hostile. Every trail felt lethal. The jungle itself seemed alive. Some soldiers later said the waiting was worse than combat, because at least in a firefight, you knew where death was coming from. Command centers scrambled for solutions. More patrols. More helicopters. More troops. Nothing worked. The problem wasn't resources. It was doctrine. America was fighting an industrial war in an environment that rewarded silence, patience, and intimate terrain knowledge. Technology meant nothing when helicopters announced their arrival 15 minutes in advance. Firepower meant nothing when targets simply vanished. Numbers meant nothing when large formations only made you easier to kill. By mid-1966, some American units were being ambushed on 40% of all patrols, 4 out of every 10. Missions ended in enemy-initiated contact. Operations were planned assuming casualties were inevitable. This wasn't warfare anymore. It was attrition. And political support. Back home was already cracking. The military desperately needed proof that this war could be fought differently. That proof was already there, operating in the same Jungle, achieving results that defied logic. When American commanders discovered who was responsible, they were stunned. The Australian Special Air Service regiment arrived carrying something the Americans lacked entirely: real jungle warfare experience, forged in blood during the Malayan emergency. The Australians understood a brutal truth. The jungle was not the enemy. Ignorance was. Vegetation wasn't hostile. Heat wasn't hostile. Rain wasn't hostile. They were tools if you knew how to use them. In early 1966, without fanfare or announcements, small Australian SAS teams began operating. They moved differently, spoke differently, and carried the calm confidence of men who had already fought and won this exact war. From 1948 to 1960, Commonwealth forces had battled communist insurgents in Malaya for 12 relentless years. Same tactics, same jungle, same enemy mindset, and the Australians had cracked the code. You couldn't bomb insurgents into submission. You couldn't sweep them away with large formations. The only way to win was to become better at jungle warfare than they were to out-stealth them, to outweight them, to turn their own environment against them. The Australian SAS descended from the legendary British SAS masters of unconventional warfare. Their doctrine was simple and terrifying: small teams, total autonomy. Deep behind enemy lines, selection broke most candidates. Training never stopped. And when the first 4-man SAS patrols entered Phuoc Thu province, American officers were openly skeptical. What could 4 men do where entire companies were failing? Everything, because size wasn't a weakness. It was the weapon. 4 men left no trails, made no noise, communicated without words. They watched for days, sometimes weeks. Then they struck and vanished. Within weeks, intelligence reports flooded in, supply caches destroyed, enemy movements tracked for days, high-value targets eliminated without survivors. Enemies were disappearing from their own territory. American analysts were shaken. Fire team-sized units were achieving strategic effects, while entire battalions struggled to survive. Efficiency gap wasn't settled. It was humiliating, and it forced a terrifying realization. The most powerful military in history had been fighting the wrong war, in the wrong way, against men who had already mastered the darkness.